Gumanaho, good Mr. Ross, Scotch Meyer here. Come with Grinch. Yeah, this person, this weirdo, with the headset on. Nice microphone. This thing working? Hopefully so. Last time I made a video about 10 movies that I didn't like, yet everyone else seemed to like for various reasons. So now, I'm gonna do the other way around. These are 10 movies that I like, yet everyone else hates for various reasons or another. Now, just like last time where I said I don't altogether hate these movies, with these movies, I'm not saying that they're masterpieces per se, but I think they get a little too much hate. Okay, some of them might be justified with the hate they receive, but I'm going to do my best to justify that they're not all that bad. So, let's jump right in, shall we? Let's start off with Prince of Persia, that Disney movie with the Jerry Bruckheimer production. Video games are pretty hard to adapt in movie form, aren't they? Fun fact, I've actually seen the movie before I played some of the actual game. The actual game is a classic sort of parkour platformer game, mainly set in one big castle, where the prince is trying to restore things back because he done goofed up, basically, and there was some character growth there. This movie largely differs from that, introducing lots of characters, making a big journey, and some of the personal growth is gone a wee bit, but there is some high-stakes action, there is some more conflict, and as well as some amazing action sequences. It looks amazing, this movie does. And there is some astounding action, and as well as some great acting and great set pieces, so I think even if you were not familiar with the Prince of Persia games, I think this movie stands out on its own. And the most faithful adaptation, maybe not, but I think it's a pretty good homage to the Prince of Persia game. Certainly better than a lot of video game adaptations. Video game adaptations in movies they're getting there. It's still something that needs to be improved, but there are some actual good ones. Like, if I were to mention the best movie based on a video game, I would recommend Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva. It's made by the same people who made the Professor Layton games. And it's a legitimately good movie. But in the meantime, we're not going to get an abundance of, like, really good video game based movies. But we do have things like Prince of Persia and the Sonic movie. The next one is Best Friends, aka Best Fiends, with a little bracket in the R. Best Friends is the follow-up movie made by the same mastermind or disaster minds that brought you The Room. Yes, Tommy Wiseau and Greg Sestero. They came back to make this indie hit, and it was based on the ups and downs of their real-life friendship surrounding The Room, which was quite sweet. And upon release, a lot of people strangely liked it, but critics did not really like it that much. And I'm sitting there wondering, this is actually a really good indie movie. No, seriously, I think this is a legitimately good indie movie. It's atmospheric. It's not boring. It's engaging. It's very pretty to look at. Some may say it loves the cinematography a bit too much over the actual story, but speaking of the acting, Tommy Wiseau and Greg Sestero have vastly improved in their acting abilities, and there's something that I really appreciate about how they portray their characters. The basically Best Friends, aka Best Fiends, is established as, how do I describe this? An indie, darkly humorous, film noir, artsy, thriller, buddy film. If that makes sense. And it's split in two parts. And if you're going into this room, then the vast majority of the audience were already followers of The Room. Like, yeah, The Room gained a cult following for being so hilariously bad it became somewhat of an ironic masterpiece. Some might say the same for this film, but I actually think it's a good movie. And not a sense that it's so bad it's good, although there are some scenes that were that way, but I think it was deliberate this time. In this movie, Greg Sestero plays as a somewhat silent, homeless drifter who's looking for something to do. And he bumps into this very quirky mortician played by Tommy Wiseau. They start a business of collecting and selling these golden teeth, and they become good friends. But then over a series of events with encounters with other people, their relationship starts to get shaky, and even though one of the characters is largely absent for the second part, the impact of their friendship still remains. And something I really admire about this movie is that Tommy and Greg have actually improved since last time, largely because they've taken the weakest aspects of their acting and they've turned them into strengths. I mean, we all know very well what their weaknesses are. Greg Sestero actually mentions that he had a bit of stage fright before he encountered Tommy Wiseau. And today he's still an introverted person, and Tommy Wiseau is still this weird, eccentric personality. And Tommy's not really putting on an act. That's just the way he is. He's just this weird, quirky guy. So Greg took on the writing role instead of Tommy this time, as well as teaming up with the director to write the roles in a specific way where they could allow a little bit of improvisation if they're caught in awkward moments to turn situations around. And as a result, the scenes feel surprisingly natural. I dare say more organic than a Woody Allen movie. And Greg managed to take advantage of his introvertedness by making his character largely silent and finding acting methods and storytelling techniques to get the audience to engage and relate to a largely silent character. Not that he's silent throughout the whole movie. And they cleverly write Tommy in a specific role where you accept, okay, he's a quirky guy. And despite one or two scenes where Tommy's supposed to be angry, I actually bought into Tommy's performance. Because he was cleverly written to make the audience accept, okay, this is a strange character. And the film can be quite intense at times. So if you haven't seen both volumes of Best Friends yet, I would recommend it. My only complaint is that it leaves it on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I think it was supposed to be a joke or something, but hey-ho, I guess you never know unless you try. The next one, Prince Caspian. This is the second installment to the Narnia trilogy? I'm pretty sure they were trying to make films about the whole saga, and there's been rumors that they were going to continue it on Netflix. And even though everybody loved Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe when it came out, well, almost everyone, critics were a bit harsher towards Prince Caspian. And I honestly don't get why. I think this is a great addition to as a film adaptation. And I can guarantee it's faithful to the books. I can guarantee you that. People were thinking, oh, it's a bit too dark. No, this is very appropriate for the theme of the entire movie. This theme about having your faith be challenged. Because proper faith is going to have its ups and downs. And this film is quite an intriguing look about how you find hope during those periods where things seem a bit darker than usual, where doubt usually arises. They may have altered some bits for a film adaptation, but I think the darker tone was much welcomed. And speaking of sequels that I like yet critics seem to hate, some of these straight-to-video Disney sequels, specifically Return to Neverland. And there's also Cinderella 3. I'm gonna be honest, I only saw the last third of that movie. During that period of time in the 2000s when Disney sold out these straight-to-video sequels where the animation was of lesser quality, as for stories, we got some terrible ones. We got, Belle's Magic World, Mulan 2. They sucked. But there were some sequels that actually worked, and dare I say, debatedly better than the originals. One of them being Return to Neverland. Now, the original was a good, straightforward Peter Pan story. I mean, the Native American scene did not really age very well, unfortunately. And I wouldn't say, that despite being ingrained in the popular culture, I wouldn't say it's the best adaptation of Peter Pan. There wasn't really too much stakes. I mean, if you're looking for a straightforward Peter Pan story, then there you go. But I think the best Peter Pan movie is the 2003 version. That version was amazing. And a lot of people have been liking the television show by Fox. But this sequel, Return to Neverland, I think it's really good. It kind of does a similar approach to Prince Caspian, with a slightly darker tone to begin with Wendy and her children going through wartime. They don't do anything too extreme with it, but it's there. The brutality, the fear, the reality of war, it's really harsh to live through. And it forces our main character, Jane, to grow up a little bit too soon for her age, which makes her arc about having fun and learning to loosen up from time to time. It's a very relatable arc. And when you look at it, she's not just some whiny, bossy kid. No, she has these motivations. She has to get back home because of the war. She's having to be a bit more disciplined. And she has to learn to respect other people in that regard. She has to learn to conquer fears, make connections. And the general drama about Jane and Peter and Tinkerbell, and even to some degree like Captain Hook, is increased. That's what I like best about the sequel. The personal, spiritual growth had more stakes to it compared to the previous installation of the Peter Pan franchise, if you can even call it that, I suppose. So Return to Neverland is one of the best sequels, if you ask me. Alright, time to do it the other way around, as it were. Let's talk about the Hobbit trilogy. I have these little figures behind, just over there. Gandalf, Bilbo, and Balin the Dwarf. If you know me, I'm a Middle-earth fan. Me and my dad and my sister. We love how rich this world is. But a lot of people didn't really like the Hobbit trilogy, and I can see why. I mean, there was a lot of focus on, like, exposition, like, the stakes aren't that high, but if you read the Hobbit trilogy, then you'll recognize it was written as a colorful, fun adventure. The Hobbit was written before the Lord of the Rings trilogy. As much as people like to complain about it, there are still some... It's still the same wonderful production quality from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The acting's still great, the effects are great, with the exception of a little bit too much CGI. The music was great, the immersion was great. I feel like I'm one of the few people who appreciate films like Unexpected Journey for the slow build-up of getting into the world and getting to know these characters. I know a lot of people who complain like, oh, the dwarves have no character. No disrespect to Tolkien, but have you actually read the book? Apart from being dwarves, most of these dwarves didn't really have definitive personalities of their own. But in this film, I love how each and every dwarf has their own distinctive look and personality. They're not just Gimli clones. No, you can point them out one by one and say, oh, that fat one is Bumber. Oh, that the Irish one played by James Nesbitt is Bifur. He's a fun and relatable fellow. Oh, that's the one who's needing hearing support. They did a really good job of giving these dwarves specific characteristics. And as the journey continues, you begin to really like them. I also like Balin. Would you say it's a sword?
Oh, not really, lad. It's more of a letter opener than an actual sword.
People like to complain about the too much CGI, but I think the CGI does work from time to time, with especially when you see characters like Gollum and Smaug who are motion captured, and they have specific details that really make these characters come alive. And Smaug, wow! I mean, how do you define the definitive dragon of literature? Like, this is how you do it. They nailed that design for Smaug. Many a fun sequence. And some of the characters may have been a bit unnecessary, but I actually did kind of like characters like Bard's family. It made Bard a bit more relatable, and they kind of remind me of friends that I have. I think the Hobbit trilogy's biggest problem was that Peter Jackson and crew were trying to make the Hobbit trilogy something it wasn't. Although a lot of it does make sense, canonically speaking, to the lore. I understand this is an epic, but there may have been a few scenes that were best left out. Especially in Battle of the Five Armies. Talk about extending it for the sake of filling out for the time. The battle scenes go on a bit too long. I understand it's a big battle, but there are some bits that just get a tad bit on the ridiculous side. And I think some bits would have really benefited from depicting the battle purely from Bilbo's perspective. Yeah, for a series called The Hobbit, they give a bit too much attention on some of the other characters. But despite these flaws, I'd still be happy to watch the Hobbit trilogy again and again. In fact, I'd be happy to watch the extended editions of both the Hobbit trilogy and the Lord of the Rings trilogy in a Middle-earth marathon that me and my dad love to do almost every year. Yes, we do watch the extended editions. I know people say, oh, too many songs in the extended edition. Again, have you read The Hobbit? A friend from high school named Greg once said, it's a songbook. I don't think you realize how much Tolkien loved the songs and such. I now have Merry Old Din stuck in my head. There's an inn, there's a merry old inn beneath the old grey hill, and there they brew a beer so brown the man on the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. Ooh. I don't know about everyone else, but I really like it. Speaking of other prequels and sequels, meh, you guys are gonna crucify me for this, metaphorically speaking. But don't worry, I'm gonna make this a draw with another film so that all of you won't be as angry as you will be. The next spot, Revenge of the Sith and The Last Jedi. Stay back, peasants! Stay back! Stay back! Hi, Dad. I think we can all agree on one thing. The original trilogy, Star Wars at its best. Mandalorian, worthy sequel. The sequel and prequel trilogy. Very interesting case. On the one hand, you have a trilogy that is more true to the lore due to being made by its original creator. But without the writing assistance, it comes across as awkward and sloppy. On the other hand, you have a team who knows how to make engaging movies, but make various inconsistencies with the lore, thus making hardcore Star Wars fans angry. Pick your poison, I guess. I think the majority of us can agree that Phantom Menace, Attack the Clones, and Rise of Skywalker are some of the lesser Star Wars movies. Some of this might have been on purpose, but the acting was kind of stilted in the prequel trilogy, and the writing, well, not just the writing, but the pacing too, it needs to be worked on. It's funny, because the same kind of formula was also established in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and yet people enjoyed it. I think it was thanks to writers like Dave Filoni who understand the fan base. That's the thing about Star Wars. You need writers who understand the fans. With the sequel trilogy, on the other hand, I find it interesting that the acting is much better, and the effects are amazing. And the pacing is much better than the prequel trilogy. It's the sequel trilogy by the pacing and the effect and the acting and the set pieces is a much more engaging film trilogy than the prequel trilogy. But of course, there have been plenty of inconsistencies that were, dare I say it, forced onto the audience. And you could definitely sense from the sequel trilogy that a lot of it was added because it was a Hollywood cash cow rather than a passion project as such. Yet, even under these circumstances, art can blossom. In that case, the best of the prequel trilogy, in my opinion, would have to be Revenge of the Sith, and I actually liked The Last Jedi. Yes, I know a lot of people hate The Last Jedi. I even spoke to a friend named Squid Jedi who can justify his hatred towards The Last Jedi. Okay, let's just get the elephant out of the room. The Last Jedi. A lot of people complain, that's not the right Luke Skywalker. Oh, that casino bit. Okay, I can agree on the casino bit. The purple-haired lady. Forced feminism. Lore inconsistencies. Yeah, I get it. Been there, done that. Yet, I've heard other people like Jackson T. Hendricks who could defend this movie by saying that the cinematography was amazing, especially in the duel between Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker. There's some visual storytelling that made for some astounding sequences, especially on the Salt Planet. It's a very peaceful place, but then stained with redness with any kind of interference, which makes for an incredible sequence where Luke doesn't turn the salt red, whereas Kylo Ren is constantly making his surroundings red. Cinematography and the set pieces were astounding. There was some great character growth between Kylo Ren and Rey and, dare I say it, Luke Skywalker. There are some intriguing concepts with the Force. And there's this visually appealing scene. There's a scene where Rey is going into the dark part. They mention how the Force works. That's a sort of a cycle of life thing, and how the island represents that. That was a fascinating scene. There's another scene where Rey goes into the dark part of the island. She goes see this mirror, which seems to have her deepest, darkest desire. She kind of sees all the way through these constant reflections. She's noticing an echo with each and every personification of her reflection. Then she's thinking, I thought it would go on forever, but it does indeed have an end. So can I please see my parents? And then these two figures come along, and then it just turns out she's looking at herself. And then it's revealed later on that she didn't really have much of a special upbringing as such. Kylo Ren confirms that she's pretty much nothing. And that really fascinated me. But of course, Rise of Skywalker ruined that. But at the time, I find it really fascinating that, and a bit of a breath of fresh air, that a main character had no prior links to any of the Skywalker or Kenobi family. They were just an outsider, and yet what's inspiring is that despite not being born into any sort of special heritage, they still managed to take up the helm as a hero anyway. Even though my friend Brooks has rightly pointed out that Rey never worked hard as such for her role as a heroine, the acting in Daisy Ridley is still quite astonishing. And she does have some character growth. She has shown genuine fear from time to time. And yeah, I know she's kind of a Mary Sue, but the growth is there. Again, it's kind of fascinating how the sequel trilogy has better acting, yet a sloppier execution. And then the prequel trilogy has sloppy acting, but more consistent backdrop, you know what I mean? And I am convinced that it's not just Hollywood that ruined the sequel trilogy. I think it was fans' expectations of the sequel trilogy. I know a lot of people love The Mandalorian regardless, but I think the reason that a lot of people were disappointed was because they'd been setting up conspiracy theories as to who Rey could be. Oh, Rey is related to Emperor Palpatine. Oh, she's the granddaughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So then they defied the norms, and everyone got angry. And then the studios thought, oh no, we upset them. Maybe we should make her a relative of Palpatine after all. You see, fans, you can have an influence in bad movies too, you know? Just saying. There's some fascinating things about letting go of the past, a few grey situations, astonishing set pieces, and I honestly liked some of the concepts that they were exploring, which is a shame because Rise of Skywalker kind of butchered some of these premises. But enough about that. Let's talk about Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith is the best of the prequel trilogy because it had better pacing, and It was quite dark. Personal stakes were raised. Yeah, even George Lucas and Ian McDiarmid admitted that raising the age rating was justified. This is quite a depressing movie in the right way possible. This is a story about someone seen as a space messiah falling to darkness. A story about how evil can trick good people into doing awful things. How people who look up to hope should be looking out for one another. It's a cautionary tale. It's a tragedy of epic proportions, even though it's not always executed properly. It's kind of a thematically disturbing film to watch. We're talking genocide of a universal scale. People dying, people doing things out of fear. Yeah, as much as the prequel trilogy didn't quite live up to the original trilogy, Revenge of the Sith was surprisingly good. So enough about Star Wars. Let's move on to the next thing before the fans slaughter me. The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston. Rest in the heavens, Whitney Houston. Our diva. Our queen of the night. I think a lot of people can have a lot of mixed reactions towards Kevin Costner. On the one hand, he's made film masterpieces that have even won some awards, like Dances with Wolves. On the other hand, there was The Postman. That exists. Oh yeah, and Waterworld too. I myself liked watching The Bodyguard. It was quite a thrill, as well as quite a good romance story, but critics really didn't like it. I liked it. It was really thrilling. And the drama was quite intense. And who could forget such song sequences as "And I will always love you"? It became somewhat iconic. And even parodied in The Simpsons. Yeah, you know you made it big when you make it to The Simpsons. If you remember that episode where Homer is a bodyguard and he's carrying Mark Hamill. Oh, I thought I wouldn't stop talking about Star Wars. A lot of people might say it's kind of wooden. And perhaps this film isn't quite the best. But it was still quite the show. And now, for a few Jim Carrey movies. The Grinch and A Christmas Carol. Yeah, both Christmas-themed movies about rotten people learning to love Christmas and be redeemed. And they both happen to feature Jim Carrey as the leading roles. Both of these films were not well appreciated. A lot of people thought it was a bit too disturbing or a bit too goofy at various points. I actually really liked them. I thought both of them were faithful adaptations to the original. Okay, The Grinch is like vastly extended, but I think they were worthy contenders, as well as adding in more material in there with The Christmas Carol. It's one of those films where I know people are mixed about the whole motion capture film aesthetic, but I think it can work for films like Tintin, Secret of the Unicorn, and to an extent Rango. They didn't really use like motion capture for Rango. They just used like real actors doing silly stuff for that. You know what I mean? That things trying to be photorealistic. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, why don't they just stick to like real life?" Well, the thing about this kind of animation is that you can make some specific characteristics that might look a tad bit silly in real life, like although maybe it would have worked with some practical effects, but I think the animation for Christmas Carol is utilized to a T here. The way the characters are designed to resemble the original illustrations of Charles Dickens' book. The ghosts are well executed, and I think the whole Uncanny Valley kind of works in their favor for like the ghost scenes, especially the Ghost of Christmas Future. He's a literal shadow. Like, that is creatively genius. Future being uncertain and scary, so what better way to personify that than with a literal shadow? Bravo, whoever came up with that. It's interesting that Jim Carrey is also playing the ghosts as well. So yeah, there were some creative choices in the way they told the story that I really appreciated. As for The Grinch, fun fact, I actually spoke to Epic Voice Guy about The Grinch. Don't believe me? Here's a clip. See? I've talked to the Epic Voice Guy. God bless you and your family, John. So, yeah, he did make a point there. The film itself is kind of in the zone of being so bad it's enjoyable. And watching it again, yeah, it kind of is. It's a bit over the top. And probably a bit too mean-spirited. But there's a really intriguing message about materialism here. I mean, this was already present in the original book in a very nuanced way, and even though I'd probably critique people for, like, spelling it out to the point of becoming, like, propaganda, but I think it's interesting how they do it here, and there's even an entire scene where the Grinch is spelling this out to the Who's in an intriguing way as a sort of a public critique. He says, oh, Christmas holidays are all about gifts. And then he points out that they want this, they want that.
So I want a pony so I can ride on and get bored and then just throw it to the garbage.
And then he says, you know what happens to all your gifts? You get rid of them. And then they come to me. In your garbage. In your garbage. Basically, he was saying that, why are you wishing for things that you're eventually just going to throw out anyway? He was pointing out their fruitless attempts with being obsessed with purchasing things, but not really getting anything lasting and of long-lasting substance. Which is why the message is, in a way, quite clever in critiquing materialism and helping people focus on what Christmas should really be about caring and loving for family, because love is eternal, not material things. The material things is just a mere side effect from giving gifts to one another because of love. And in a sense, that's what Grinch realizes when he's dumping the toys. That's, how the story goes. And the practical effect of the Grinch actually kind of does work to a T as well. Like, Jim Carrey, I love how expressive Jim Carrey is as an actor, and coupled with the makeup, he's practically unrecognizable as that Grinch. So despite how ridiculous these films can possibly get, there's still a lot of heart put into it. Speaking of which, next one is called Barnyard. Does anyone remember this movie? Oh wait, I'm going to mention Barnyard and Hoodwinked. Does anyone remember both of these movies? These were CGI animated movies back around somewhat after Shrek was making its impact in the culture. And a lot of films were trying to cash in on that success. With taking the sort of cutesy image of the past and just kind of modernizing it for comedic effect. And a lot of people say that these films are not the best, but I think they were written in quite a fun and clever way. With Barnyard, you have these animals doing fun shenanigans, but there's also quite a bit of drama involved. Like, don't let the cover fool you. Barnyard has a surprising amount of heartbreak and even a legitimately intimidating villain. Like, the villain of this movie is a coyote out to eat the chickens with his gang. And, his character design is so scary. It's, got a menacing sort of look, just a menacing voice, and, you can see his ribs just to see the desperation of how hungry he is.
Are you gonna stop us? So we got Joe Hen?
That's literally how he laughs. It's quite intimidating. And even though the ridiculous shenanigans could go on a bit too long, I think they do work on a comedic level, and also adds to the theme of responsibility. What you're going to do? Are you going to be a goofball, or you're going to stand up for the friends you're being a goofball around with? And what better way to learn that lesson with a father figure who's voiced by what was his name again? Oh, darn, I've forgotten his name. He's the cowboy voice. Big mustache. What was his name? Sam Elliott, that's what it was. Sam Elliott has one of the coolest lines ever. Put the hand down, Dag. Surprising amount of drama, too. And then there's Hoodwinked, which is deliberately more comedic. And I think this is a genius premise. I think more films should take this kind of premise. It's it's the story of Little Red Riding Hood, but then it's set after the story as a sort of a crime scene. Like, Red Riding Hood and Granny and the Woodsman and the Wolf are all arrested for causing the public damage in the house. there's these policemen, and they're all being interviewed about what they were doing prior to this event, and it links into this mystery with the Goody Bandit. I think more films, animated or not, should take this approach. Makes for an intriguing story, and one of the most fun parts of the story is seeing how everything happened, putting the pieces together, which even makes for a few gags. Like, we see it from Red Riding Hood's perspective first. Like, there's a scene where she's having to evade an avalanche in a minecart, only to be flung off a broken rail cart. We see later on that the avalanche was caused by her granny, who was partaking in a skiing competition, and the broken rail tracks was caused by the wolf and his squirrel assistant lighting up dynamite.
Oh, I got some bright candles.
A box of candles, light them up. He's voiced by Patrick Warburton. Oh, those candles are awfully bright. What kind of candles are there?
Dinamite. Ooh, must be Italian.
Lose the candle. They blow up the railway. Like, there are some geniusly funny moments, and that squirrel Twitchy is so funny. That the funniest bit about Twitchy, he's hyper voiced, and they ask him, "Do you drink coffee?" "No, I don't drink coffee." And I won't give away too much, but the reveal of the villain does have some justified clues to it, making the sort of a twist villain kind of justified. Disney should take some notes. Last one on this list, Blair Witch. My scrappy notebook that I tried to take with me on my run. Not a notebook, a note. So Blair Witch is a sequel to the Blair Witch Project, this really successful indie horror movie that took the world by storm with its home camera cinematography to make everything much more realistic, as it were. The crippling fear of being pursued by an evil, devilish occult witch, and these teenagers who are a tad bit too curious to document all about her in the woods. And even though we never see the witch, the acting and the setup really sells it. And the one called Blair Witch does the same thing. Now, what's a shame about this movie is that the build-up is nowhere near as good as it was with the first Blair Witch movie. However, this Blair Witch movie does make up for it in the last third of it. The last third is one of the most intense scenes I have ever seen. To the point where I would even say the dream Blair Witch film, if anyone's daring to do that sort of thing, is to have a build-up similar to the first movie, with a finale similar to Blair Witch. With the heroes being chased down by the Blair Witch and desperately trying to struggle for survival in a claustrophobic, run-down, ramshack house. And even though we technically do see the witch in some CGI shots, she still looks ugly and horrifying. Yo, ugly. And the acting, just like in the first movie, really sells it. Like, I look at these actors, they are terrified, and they are sobbing. Like, they are sobbing so much, they could barely breathe properly. That's that kind of terrified. To the point where I honestly thought they would manage to get away with it. I'm probably spoiling it, but I think you kind of saw this coming anyway. May not be the best film ever, but I think people who are trying to make a thrill in their movies should take notes. And there you go. Those are some movies that I really like, yet everyone else seemed to hate for various reasons or another. What are movies that you really appreciated, yet critics and people alike really seem to not like? Let me know in the comments down below. Scott Myers signing out.